Welcome to the Duality Way Podcast, where we discuss all things health and wellness from a professional perspective with an understanding of the dualistic nature of life. My name is Martin Lebrain.
And I'm Carlo Gomes, and our topic for today is stress, sleep and sweat, the trio that your body cannot live without. And that relates to stress being adversity or sleep, and sweat being exercise. So, Martin, let's kick it off.
So I love the combination of, or rather the relationship between stress and sleep. And then I'll get to later how exercise sort of ties into it. But basically speaking, a lot of what I focus on is sort of like the hormonal side of things. So obviously when we stress, we secrete cortisol, which then impedes your sleep, which then makes you more stressed, which then makes you release more cortisol, which then makes you sleep worse, which then makes you stressed, which then, and so it becomes this really like vicious cycle. And the one thing that I love is, one of the ways you can curb your stress and sort of equal out your cortisol levels, because obviously everything is on a negative scale, where when you secrete more cortisol, then your body will secrete something else, which is actually the reason why you struggle to sleep. So cortisol itself does not necessarily directly relate to the sleep portion of it, but it does relate to adrenaline release, which then relates to how your body responds physically, which then impedes your sleep. And it's funny that we call this the stress, sleep and sweat, because partially why sweat plays into it is that when we sweat, especially in our sleep from stress, you actually dehydrate yourself, which then increases your cortisol levels, which then increases your stress levels even further. So it's a combination that I love looking at. And obviously, as we know, exercise is one of the ways to level out your cortisol levels and help to reduce your stress, which then helps you sleep better. So it's almost as though exercise is kind of like the cure to the to the stress and sleep cycle going bad. Obviously we know it also, it does unfortunately take time, as we know, it doesn't just magically stop this bad cycle. But
so what's interesting is you're kind of taking this approach of when the exercise is missing, then these other two that are remaining fall out of balance.
100%.
And you mentioned in the previous episode about how you went through a period where you were hyper focused on your exercise while also still trying to build your career and all sorts of things. And so as a result, your sleep was out of there.
100%.
So you had the stress and you had the exercise and no sleep. And that obviously landed you in a toxic cycle.
100%.
So I think that's interesting that all three need to be in balance.
100%, yeah. And it's really about homeostasis. And like it's the one sorry, that was actually it's a little air thing that just pumped out there.
It wasn't going to pick it up.
I'm sure it did. But anyway, it doesn't matter. And we talk about homeostasis, and homeostasis is the idea of everything being in balance. So the body reacts in, like I mentioned earlier, a negative cycle way. So when our body reacts to having too much of something, it then secretes something else, which then stops the brain from secreting more of that thing. So for instance, when we have high cortisol, our body secretes more adrenaline, and when there's high adrenaline, then we drop in cortisol. But then adrenaline has physical responses.
So it's like the body's response to sugar with insulin.
100%.
Okay.
So when you've got high adrenaline, your cortisol drops, but then when the adrenaline is too high, your body releases more cortisol, and then that's why the cycle becomes so dangerous.
Okay.
And funnily enough, as much as exercise can be the solution, it can also be the problem, as was the case in my case. So when you're not sleeping enough and your stress levels are high, your body is already just sitting at a very high cortisol and adrenaline space. And so when you exercise on top of that, your body has to burn through a lot more just in order to survive.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, it has to stay in like what I call survival mode, where basically speaking, everything you put in your body, it's not used to build anything, it's just used to maintain what's there. And the body doesn't like to be in that space. It needs a lot more sort of capacity to grow. And that's a very interesting thing, because it's the same in the mental space. As we talk to sort of under-challenged burnout, I almost feel like not having balance in all three aspects forces you into that under-challenged burnout, because you never have capacity to do anything.
Yes.
That makes sense.
And you'll end up like bored.
100%.
Yeah.
So it's almost like your body's bored, and your body just wants you to create that space to do what it's got to do to go out of that maintenance mode and into the growth phase. And so that's also where like sleep plays a massive role. Is the 8 hours or more that's recommended is there so that the body can build, it can continue its protein synthesis cycle, it can help with your hormone regulation and all of those things.
Yeah, actually, now that you mentioned that, like, you know, one thing that I do sometimes struggle with is sleep. Like, I have no problem falling asleep, but obviously, and I've mentioned this in the previous episode as well, is that I sometimes wake up really early for no apparent reason. And obviously, like, you know, the reason why I kept beating myself up about that is because it's like, I'm putting in so much work into my weight training. I am putting in the work, you know, at work. And so, like, I've got those spheres there, like, in terms of my adversity and my training itself. But then without getting the proper sleep, I know that it's going to then start affecting the fact that I won't actually be able to grow my muscles as well as I can, because that's when they grow. They grow when you sleep. And at the same time, then I won't be able to perform the next day as well as I want to. So yeah, I understand that. But then at the same time, I'm also reminded of a story, just talking about stress and adversity. I remember when I was back in school, my headmaster at the time when I was in primary school told me this story about the barrier reef, and how on one side of the barrier reef the currents are strong, and on the other side the currents are pretty flat. Like, there's no real there's no real flow. There's no like, the tide is not as strong. And it's interesting because the side that has the really rough waves that are really like crashing against the reefs and, you know, things like that, that is where the reef is flourishing and full of color, and, you know, but on the other side where the reef is flat and there isn't much flow, as you said, the reef is dying. There's no real color to it. So that brings us back to, like, how, yes, stress is usually equated to something negative, but the right amount of stress, the right amount of adversity can help push you to grow. And I look at our dynamic as business partners as well. We frustrate the living hell out of each other.
That's true.
And, like, you know, we often talk about how I'm the brakes and you're the accelerator. And oftentimes I feel like I'm the guy holding onto the tail of the racehorse while you are sprinting. But at the same time, you pull me out of my comfort zone. Without you pulling me forward, I would be stuck in analysis paralysis. And I feel like, and not like, obviously I don't want to speak for you, but I do feel like that you sometimes go too fast without actually working out the little details and the steps along the way. So I feel like I force you to slow down so that we can actually make sense out of the dreams, out of the plans, the 5-year plan, the 10-year plan, the 15-year plan. So, but I don't have the vision of the 5-year plan and the 10-year plan and the 15-year plan, so we kind of balance each other out in that way. So again, where one thing may be seen as a positive and the other as a negative, and even the other way around, without that balancing of the two, there is no homeostasis.
Very true.
So yeah, that's my take on that.
I agree, and I think what we've noticed in our business at the moment, especially by being able to have that dichotomy of, you know, there is times where there's acceleration, there's times where there's brakes. It allows enough sort of space for growth. So we obviously, like I mentioned earlier, and it's funny because I do consider our business to be sort of like how do I say this? It's an example of why the dualistic philosophy works.
Yeah.
And it's because it relates so well to what the body does. Sorry. When we're in acceleration phases, I know you oftentimes feel like you are overloaded and you just don't have the time to put into the growth pieces. We've recently obviously tried to restructure some of our strategies, and in order to do that, I've had to actually like mentally make a note of don't add pressure, let them do their thing. And as much as that's been difficult for me, it's actually forced me into sort of a space of growth in other spaces, because a lot of the times, and the body does this too, as we know, you need to break something just a little bit in order for it to grow. So that's what you were mentioning about the reef. So we can almost draw into that comparison of like the waves crashing against the reef, as when you exercise, your muscles tear that little bit.
100%.
And when you mentally challenge your brain, you might feel like super tired immediately afterwards because your brain is slightly exhausted. But then the connections that grow out of that are what we're chasing.
Yeah.
But it's important to also allow the time for that recovery in order for the body to solidify that. And so, like obviously within our business, I think we finally reached a point where the homeostasis is there enough that we're growing, but we're also solidifying what is there. And I think that that's also, I love bodybuilding. And so recently, Urs Kalasinski has just moved from the classic division to the open division, and that's a massive thing because the weight caps are hugely different. And I love it because every one of the like bodybuilding scientific guys that are there to talk about how well people are going to do and sort of predict everything, were like, it shouldn't be easy for him to go in and win. But he's specifically complained for like the last 6 seasons basically that the weight caps in classic physique are holding him back. Classic physique is holding him back. Other people have tried it, they didn't necessarily win. Even the classic physique champion, Chris Bumstead, that we all know and love, he's a wonderful bodybuilder, but he went into his first pro show as an open bodybuilder to retire, and he didn't win. And the one thing that I loved was Urs delivered on the fact that things weren't fitting what he should be. And it's similar to like you look at the snake. If you keep it in too small of an enclosure, it never grows. It stays where it is, but then it keeps shedding its skin, and every time it sheds its skin, it's supposed to grow. And then they tend to have like these overlaps of scales that just grow up on each other. And it's quite interesting because if you don't reach a point where you allow it that space to grow, it never stretches as much as it should. So then it just continually gets these like build-ups along its body, which is quite cool. But at the same time, it's kind of like a really great example. And you can also see it in fish when you don't give them a big enough tank, they never grow.
Yeah.
So they stay really small, for instance. And it's important again to find that balance.
Yeah.
Because if you put them in too big of a tank with too big fish, they get
eaten. Yeah.
And so it's like a really great analogy. And so, like I said, I think I found the story of Urs Kalasinski quite inspiring because he found the right size to win his first competition, which is a really big deal. And it's like, it was such a cool analogy for me for just finding the space where you are challenged, because it's not easy to grow when you grew 17 kilograms of muscle mass for stage weight, which is incredible. And to do that in a season where he wasn't preparing for it from the start either, is incredible. And so first and foremost, Urs, well done. And then secondly, I think it's such a great analogy for what we're speaking about today, where you've got to find that balance of everything, but part of that is also your circumstance. So I think as much as we talk to the fact that stress and sleep are linked, and exercise as well, it's also about circumstance. If you are permanently in stressful situations because of your work environment, or because you're out of place, or you have problems at home, or you have mental issues that you're not working on, or whatever, you've really got to hone in on that to create that homeostasis to be able to grow again. Because as you know, as I mentioned in the last podcast as well, when I was going through recovery in the addiction phase, you know that I did a reset diet. Right?
Yeah.
So I went full vegetarian and full lactose free because my skin absolutely just
broke
pimples everywhere, and I was so inflamed everywhere, and I also felt like chubby, and it was because my body was physically reacting to the fact that it now had to learn how to do things without the presence of alcohol.
Yeah.
And it was very interesting for me because, coming out of that stress, I felt like I could do anything. And it gives you that perspective of like, things might be tough now, and I'm sure you know the buffalo and the storm analogy.
No, actually,
you don't know. So the analogy is that there are, when buffaloes see a rainstorm, they don't run away, they run towards it.
So yes, I have heard about this.
They get through the storm faster, right?
Okay.
And it's kind of like, yes, there are, but again, you have to find that level where it's productive stress.
Yeah, of course.
So obviously, if they're drowning, they're not going to continue running forward, right?
You can't rainbow life and
So yeah, you do have to attack the storm, but it has to be productive. You can't drown.
Yeah.
You cannot come out of the end of it, but obviously the idea is that you would come out the other side faster than someone who ran the other way and let the storm catch up to them. But not only that, you face it, and that allows you to be prepared. So I don't know if you've ever had this, but like when you do a cold shower and you're not expecting it to be cold, your body goes, oh my gosh, dying. Whereas when you kind of like mentally prepare for it, you immediately go in and you just stand
you accept
fine.
it. Yeah.
And that's another thing that I kind of want to talk to is the mental aspect of the acceptance and the preparation therefore is also a very important thing for me, and I find that if you're mentally prepared for something, you can do whatever you want. You can really do anything, but you have to know what you're getting into.
It's like building resilience.
100%.
Yeah.
And by giving ourselves those micro challenges, like a cold shower would be, I would never do this on a consistent basis, but like a cold shower would be, you train yourself to continually be able to deal with adversity.
I can imagine that was a very powerful way to deal with your withdrawals.
Yeah, cold showers.
Not just the cold shower, yes. So that the challenge of preparing yourself for the difficulty of that cold shower can also be equivalent to dealing with knowing that you're going to be dealing with the difficulty of the withdrawals.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's comparable. I did the cold showers after the fact that I didn't do them in the meantime, but it was to challenge myself when I did do them in that period of time that you're talking about.
Okay.
So for context to you guys, it was just after I'd gone through the withdrawals and I was starting to sort of reset everything. I went on a cold shower fad, which I don't think is necessary anymore. I know there are health benefits to it, but your comfort is also nice. So I think there's that nice balance of challenging yourself, but also being able to recognize what is productive and what isn't. And for me, the cold showers at that point in time was just the mental challenge aspect of it, of surrendering to the process, knowing that coming out of it, the plan was to have a better control over the adrenal response. And so it's a really nice way to do it. If you do find the shock therapy of it nice, but it's not necessary for sure.
Okay, so let's talk practical. So we've touched on obviously exercise and how you need to have a balance. You can't overdo it, you can't underdo it. Obviously, you are more likely to underdo exercise. So obviously focus more on getting in that exercise. We've touched on adversity and stress in general. People are generally more likely to be overstressed than understressed. But at the same time, if you're bored at your job, then obviously that's a complete under stress, and you need to challenge yourself in some way to hype yourself up and balance that aspect. Sleep. So we've spoken about obviously how sleeplessness can affect certain things. So one trick that I picked up to help fall asleep. Not that I've ever really had much trouble falling asleep, but there are times when there's a lot of things on my mind and I struggle. I use cognitive shuffling, and that helps to put you into semantic fatigue. And basically what that is when you're falling asleep, your brain kind of starts fragmenting your thought processes. So that's when you start getting the random images and like things just don't really coherently make sense. It's like a half dream state that you're kind of starting to go through. Usually to reach that point, you need to have semantic fatigue. And that is like when your brain is tired of logically going from one process to another.
Okay.
So when you're falling asleep, if you're continually in that logical process, it's a problem, because that's what keeps you awake. So when you the way that you can speed that process up is by using something called cognitive shuffling. And cognitive shuffling, an example of that would be, imagine a word like horse, okay, and then you take the beginning of each letter and you list 4 things about that. So H, you think Harry, you think hit, you think, that kind of thing. So you randomly generate 4 words that don't relate to each other, and then you move on to the next. So you move on to like the O of horse, and you think of 4 random words that don't relate to each other again. And that kind of tires your brain out, and then puts you more into that, it kind of prepares you for that randomness of that dream state. And then you fall asleep. So that is an interesting thing, and obviously we've spoken about how everybody knows how good sleep is for you. Everyone's always, but what happens when we oversleep?
To be honest with you, I haven't done much research on that. So I don't feel like I'm educated enough to talk to that, to be honest.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I mean, I know that personally, if I oversleep, I land up finding it difficult to get out of bed, and then I land up feeling very lazy for the rest of the day. So
makes that makes sense in the same, but I don't know the processes involved in what that is. But I definitely feel the same. Like, there's obviously that we all talk about the golden hour, if that makes sense. Where like you've just had enough sleep. Where, there's always those memes about 4 hours of sleep, I'm super groggy. 8 hours of sleep, I'm good. 9 hours of sleep, I'm groggy. And like there must be something to it in terms of the physical response to having too much sleep. And it's interesting, maybe I'll do some more research on it.
That's all the time we have for this episode. Join us for the next episode.
Food and mood, eating for clarity and not just calories.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers, guys.